Hey, looks like you're the new dealer. Here's what we're smuggling. $300 trillion worth of pre-war videos. Almost enough to buy one Big Mac. Yeah, they shouldn't have kept that money printer on for that long. Anyway, if we're going to make it out of here alive, you need to know who, or more precisely, what we're going up against. So walk with me, and I'll tell you how we got here. So if you want to know how you got here, first we have to go back.
Smart woman.
Oh, too far. Okay, that's better. Welcome to the early 2000s, or as it's more commonly known, Purgatory. Today is October 26th, 2001, and Mr. Lie to go to war is about to send us 17 years back through one stroke of a pen. Now, he's about to sign something called the Patriot Act. Sounds good, right? Patriots are good, therefore this must be good. Well, that's by design. It actually stands for Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act. Now, I'm guessing you know why any president would be willing to sign this, so let's just get through some of the things the Patriot Act was designed to do. According to the American government, the act was designed to, quote, deter and punish terrorist acts in the United States and around the world. Now, they tried to do this through a bunch of different methods, such as Section 221, which created sanctions to try to stop terrorism.
Stop! You violated the law!
A plan which has worked every time it's been tried and has never only made the lives of innocent people worse. But for this topic, we're going to be looking at Section 215. Now, this section gives the government the ability to seize any, quote, tangible thing if it can assist with a terrorist investigation, which means they can take books, computers, and almost anything someone has except for, We'll get back to that. Okay, now we need to hop back to 1978. The government wants to get warrants on things, but they don't want the dangerous men that will corrupt youth through their rock songs, nursery rhymes, and video games to find out that they're spying on them. So they invent the FISA Court, or FISIC, which means Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act Court, or just Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and can be that court which grants warrants without people knowing. Okay, now going forward to the late 2000s, the Patriot Act has been used and continued to 2007. Then, an amendment to the FISA Act, which created the FISA Court, was made, called the Protect America Act of 2007, which again, sounds great. I want to protect America, so this must be good. Anyway, what this actually does is it eliminates the requirement for the government to obtain a warrant to monitor foreign intelligence targets they reasonably believe to be outside the USA. Then, the FISA Court decided that any tangible thing in the Patriot Act basically means anything. With this, and a few other amendments to the FISA Act, made it so that, by accident, the intelligence community, this includes the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, and some other agencies, or as I like to call them, the most honest and knowledgeable organizations in the history of the world. Please do not have me killed, CIA. I promise I'm not a South American elected official. Anyway, they gave the intelligence community a blank check to collect almost anything on anyone they wanted to. Now on to some of the things that they did with this power. Okay, so now that you have some backstory, we're just going to go look at some of the things that they did. Now, I'll just go over some of the larger programs that were set up and try to explain what they were just so you have an idea of what they were doing. Just so you know, these are all confusing and that's by design. So if you don't understand it, or if you just don't want to learn them, then just trust me when I say the intelligence community was spying on the world as well as Americans, and then go to this timestamp. Okay, so since you're all still here, let's look at the programs. To begin, let's look at the PRISM program, also known as SIGAD US-984XN, but I don't want to recite what looks like a nuclear launch code every time I mention this program, so I'm just going to call it its more common name. Anyway, this collected internet communications from multiple United States internet companies. Some of the United States companies are Apple, Microsoft, Google, YouTube, and Facebook. But what does the term internet communications even mean? Basically, internet communications means the variety of ways people can communicate throughout the internet. This includes videos, photos, emails, video conferences, and other types of communication through the internet. And they collected this by getting that information from those internet companies. The upstream program collects internet communications as well, but as the communications travel through the internet via pieces of infrastructure. Mystic was a program designed to collect information on and record foreign countries' phone calls, and to review that information for up to 1 month. In 2013, this program collected information from Mexico, the Philippines, Kenya, the Bahamas, and an intentionally unidentified country. The NSA and FBI also gave a court order from FISIC to Verizon, requiring them to give up information on all telephone calls they had in their system, including calls between a US citizen and another US citizen. I also think it should be mentioned that out of the 41,222 total warrant requests ever sent to FISIC for electronic surveillance, only 1,252 were changed and only 85 were denied, so this decision wasn't a major surprise. But this was still a big deal because many people knew that the Bush administration did warrantless wiretapping through some smaller leaks, but many people thought that the cool, hip, and new president would stop this because he ran on a campaign of stopping many of the programs Bush made. So when these programs proved he did not follow through on that, many people were understandably surprised. And also, there's a small problem that spying on hundreds of thousands of people without individual warrants is not how surveillance was meant to be used. Anyway, onto some other programs.
Mjolnir?
Jonathan?
Yeah, that. Egotistical Giraffe, Egotistical Goat, Erroneous Identity, and Moth Monster were all tools or programs designed to decrypt the users of the Tor browser, which is a browser that makes you and your searches anonymous by sending it down 3 routers to the point where it's incredibly difficult to connect what someone searched up and who searched something up. The intelligence community was able to decrypt this by using an exploit in the Firefox engine, the browser that shows the dangers of simplification, or by sending people down a chosen route, or by other methods, so they can see what whistleblowers, drug dealers, or political activists are doing. Boundless Informant was a data analysis and visualization tool that proved the NSA knew they were collecting metadata on millions of Americans. Metadata is basically just data about data, but that's not the important part of this. The point of this is that it proved that the intelligence community was collecting records on millions of Americans. To all the youngsters out there confused about how to react to this is how most people reacted to this when it first came out in your own language.
Impressive.
To continue, Bull Run was a program designed to decrypt online information by misleading corporations into adding vulnerabilities, using advanced mathematical techniques to decrypt online information, or other methods. X-Keyscore was a collection of programs that monitored and collected communications from fiber optic cables, and would then give the intelligence community, along with some other agencies in other countries, including Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, the ability to search through that information similar to a search engine. This collected 20 terabytes of information every day, and that content could be held for 3 to 5 days, while the metadata could be in the system for 30. Marina was a metadata database and analysis tool of X-Keyscore that tracked the internet histories of targets and created summaries of them. It also had the ability to store that metadata for up to 1 year. Pinwhale was another program that was part of X-Keyscore and did similar tasks to it, but this also searched through emails, and agencies had to go through the FISA court beforehand. Traffic Thief was another part of X-Keyscore, and, in short, it was a set of metadata that was connected to emails, names, and other information the intelligence community was targeting. Because there are way too many programs to mention individually, we'll end this long list with Epic Shelter. Epic Shelter was a program designed by Edward Snowden to back up all the data that had not already been backed up, and to prevent that data from being lost if one server fails. Okay, so now that you're reflecting some of John Oliver's feelings talking to Edward Snowden of
"Don't teach me anything, I don't want to learn,"
and you know a bit about what the intelligence community was doing with the power given to them, which was basically, "Hey director, did you ever get to that mandatory class on the dangers of mass spying?" Oh, you skipped it. I thought there was a lot of good information in it, but okay. Let's get on to the more interesting information about how this all got out and how this story ends. Okay, so you may have noticed that I mentioned someone named Edward Snowden. Now, this part of the story will mostly revolve around him. So for some background information, he was a contractor working for Booz Allen Hamilton and was working at the NSA as an analyst. So he was taking all of his directions from the NSA, worked in an NSA facility, and had all the security clearances of an NSA agent. So for this story, I'll just shorten it to he worked for the NSA, which he did. This is going to be a massive oversimplification, but in short, Edward Snowden was working on Epic Shelter, then figured out that the intelligence community was probably using mass surveillance. Then he quickly learned about the things that the intelligence community was doing over his time working for the NSA, confirming his suspicions. He then felt like the public should decide if this was the right thing to do. So he made a plan. That being to get all the information about warrantless wiretapping and domestic surveillance to reporters. who would then report that information to the public. So over a few months, he downloaded a bunch of information and made a plan to meet some reporters in Hong Kong. The reporters he decided to expose it to were Laura Poitras, Barton Gelman, Glenn Greenwald, and Ewan McCaskill. For most people who know this story, they also know the Mission Impossible style way that he got this information outside of the NSA's Hawaii headquarters. You know, slipping it into a Rubik's Cube, or hiding it in a shoe, or downloading it onto a USB, crushing it up, and then inhaling the powder so he could memorize all of the information and safely recreate it when he was outside the facility. And although most of these stories are true, and I'm not trying to take away from what he did, but most of the time he would just keep a micro SD card in his pocket and then walk out the front door. I would like to remind you that he stole it from a place that had the word security in its name, like it was a testing place for Amazon Go.
We call it Just Walk Out technology.
Another explosive article has just appeared, this time in the Washington Post.
Okay, back to the story. So he succeeded, and the information got to the public. Now let's look at how the USA is doing after this was exposed. Okay, the government is in chaos, but that happens all the time, don't worry about it. Then everyone else seemed pretty shocked at these revelations. Quickly, some people began to ask for more privacy, a pretty basic request, and then people accused James Clapper, who was the director of national intelligence, of lying under oath. This is what they pointed out to be a lie.
So what I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly.
Then, Keith Alexander, the director of the National Security Agency, was also accused of lying. This is what he said.
Does the NSA intercept Americans' cell phone conversations?
No.
Google searches?
No.
Text messages?
No.
Amazon.com orders?
No.
Bank records?
No. We're not authorized to do it, nor do we do it.
Thank you.
But he also said that these programs stopped a bunch of terrorist attacks. So let's get on to the rationales and arguments that came out of this chaotic time. So people began to make claims that mass surveillance stopped the bad men from doing the bad things, a claim often being made that 54 terrorist attacks were stopped because of it. This was, at best, an exaggeration and at worst, a lie. Because even if they had a bunch of information, they still needed a lead to use that information on. And if they had a lead, then they could have just received a warrant to spy on that one person's communications. Then, some people said, well, if you have nothing to hide, mass surveillance doesn't matter. And in my personal experience, as many times as I argue that in court, people still say, but you shouldn't be looking in everyone's houses at night, or, but they had a restraining order against you. Double standards, I swear. But this also implies that privacy is something only criminals want, which is incorrect. Some people also said that Snowden endangered American troops and spies, or gave the enemy the upper hand, which I will say is somewhat more likely than most of these claims, but still, he technically didn't expose anything directly, it's just that some journalists didn't correctly censor information that could be dangerous to American spies. One example of this being this PowerPoint, which was poorly redacted to the point where people could see that the NSA was spying on the Toyota fan club / Dumb and Dumber roleplay group, ISIS, before people knew their name. But that being said, this problem of endangering people is most likely exaggerated because if there was extensive evidence that this damaged troops, the government would want people to know the damage his whistleblowing caused, and we would have most likely heard about it. And to prove damage to undercover spies is also difficult because to do this you would have to risk spies that are currently working being found, and that would do even more damage. So for this, you have to believe what the leaders of the intelligence community said. Now, another thing that some people ask is along the lines of, Bergen, how is it that the US government gave the intelligence community millions and millions of dollars, yet they still couldn't find a good graphic designer? And that's a good question. But another is, couldn't he have just gone through other avenues to stop these things? But this idea of dealing with problems in secret government agencies has some problems itself. To begin, the whistleblower protections that most people said would protect him did not apply to him, because they were already pretty weak during his time at the NSA. But before his leaks in 2013, many of the protections for intelligence community government contractors were removed, meaning that because he was a government contractor, he had fewer protections from retaliation from those agencies. But then there's what happened to whistleblowers who tried to go through the proper channels, being, in a good case, moved to another department and never seeing the things that concern them again, or, in a bad case, being arrested and charged with the Espionage Act. So from his perspective, his two choices were to 1. Get charged as a traitor, or 2. Get charged as a traitor and see a public conversation about these programs occur. Okay, let's see what Snowden's doing. He just got onto a plane in Hong Kong and is currently traveling to Russia with plans to eventually get to Ecuador. But looks like John Kerry, the current Secretary of State, is a bit annoyed and charges against Snowden have just been dropped. Let's see what he's been charged with. Ooh, that's good. He was just charged under the Espionage Act of 1917 and theft of government property, meaning he's currently facing a maximum of 20 years in prison. Right after these charges were made, John Kerry decided that he wanted to make spying on Snowden much more difficult.
Cancel it.
So, he cancelled his passport, trapping him in Sheremetyevo International Airport. Then Snowden began to apply for asylum in a bunch of different countries, but according to Snowden and other sources, every time a country began to think about giving him asylum, they either got a call from John Kerry or then Vice President Joe Biden telling to not give Snowden asylum. Now, let's go into what happened to everyone, and changes that occurred because of Snowden's revelations, since most of the dust has settled. Okay, so now let's look how this story turned out, and how it set the backdrop for why we're here. To begin, 7 years after the mass surveillance was exposed, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit made a decision that mass surveillance and collecting of phone records was in violation of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and was most likely unconstitutional. For what happened to Section 215, it expired in 2015 as the USA Freedom Act became law, and I know every time we've discussed a program like this, it has some violations of the Constitution or something like that, but I raise you, freedom is good, so I'm pretty sure this is going to be good too. Anyway, what this actually stands for is Uniting and Strengthening America by Fulfilling Rights and Ensuring Effective Discipline Over Monitoring Act of 2015, which did put some legal restraints on domestic surveillance, but kinda just continued Section 215. But in 2019, the section was amended to make sure that mass surveillance of phone records in the NSA would no longer occur, and the section expired in March 2020. And I'm sure Congress did that through thoughtful debate and careful planning. I mean, letting it expire because they couldn't reach an agreement is only 5D chess for wanting massive reform. And I'm sure nothing else was going on in March 2020. I mean, when I think back to that month, I don't remember anything, it's just a blank void. But although it did expire, some recent events I saw while making this show that unwarranted surveillance continued even without Section 215. Some other good news that has come from learning about these programs is now there is significantly more websites that are secure. You can see this if you go to any website such as YouTube and click the link. You can see HTTPS, which is different from HTTP and means Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, which means that if a website has that in their link, they have your data encrypted while it's being transferred through the internet. So any website that has a padlock is encrypted. Every iPhone app since 2016 is, every Android app since 2018 is, 90% of all websites in 2020 are encrypted, and 96% of the top 100 websites use HTTPS. Tom Scott did a great video on this, which is about VPNs, but it still explains this much better than I can. Finally, in some positive and more recent news, there seems to be a larger consensus that transparency in government organizations is a good thing. Recently, there was even a letter written to the Supreme Court arguing for more transparency in government agencies, basically saying, yeah, the government needs to be secret sometimes, but there's also a need for transparency, while also admitting that the complete secrecy that was permanent before the Snowden leaks most likely led to them, which sounds small until we see that James Clapper was among the people who supported it, which is a massive step because, realistically, he would have never touched a letter like this when the Patriot Act was around. Now that's what mostly happened to the mass surveillance exposed by the Snowden leaks. But let's look at the main characters and see what happened to them. Cue music. James Clapper was not prosecuted for anything he did, and instead resigned at the end of 2016. He now works for CNN and for a Washington, D.C. think tank. Keith Alexander was also not charged with anything, and he now works as a co-CEO and founder of a private security company, as well as a member of Amazon's board of directors. Joseph Biden is now President of the United States, and at any point has the power to assassinate Edward Snowden with little to no intervention from the other branches of government. After John Kerry trapped a US citizen in another country that has a fun little habit of killing reporters and silencing critics, he became part of US President Joe Biden's team as Presidential Envoy for Climate. George W. Bush did not face any punishment for signing the Patriot Act. Barack Obama has also not faced repercussions for continuing it. Moving out of the Christian sports movie ending, Edward Snowden was given asylum in Russia, and he's written a book called Permanent Record, which goes into much more detail than I did on why he did what he did, how he got into Russia, and some backstory, and I would highly recommend it. I'm not being paid to say this because, let's be real, why would they pay me? But I really think this is a good book, and while I'm on the topic, I would also recommend Mao's Forbidden City and The Intelligent Investor. For some of the reporters, both Glenn Greenwald and Barton Gellman went on to write a book about the programs exposed by Snowden. Laura Poitras' documentary Citizen 4 won the Academy Award for the Best Documentary in 2015, and generally, the reporters are respected for their work covering the Snowden revelations. So that all brings us back here, 2037. After the Patriot Act was disregarded, it stayed that way until the gender reveal disaster of 2025. After that, the world lay in disarray. Some even thought it was the apocalypse. Hell, even my twin brother thought it was the end. But 4 years after that, the government reformed, and the first thing they did was create an act called the Puppies and Kittens Wholesome 100 Moment Act, which just kind of eroded our foundation of freedom. So I'm about to pass out from heat stroke because I've kept adding tinfoil to my body throughout this walk, and honestly, I think you should have said something to stop me. But to end this off, am I saying that when one of the most invasive disregards for the Constitution of the United States was exposed, the only person who was punished was the person who told everyone? Yes I am. Truth sometimes isn't that fun. Happy 4th of July, everyone.